Well, welcome back, everybody. Today, we are going to be looking at the White House's new AI action plan, or what they're calling Winning the Race America's Action Plan. And I got to tell you, I know most people haven't even heard about this, much less read it, but it's really important because the U.S. government has essentially laid down the gauntlet. And they are saying, hey, we are in the middle of a new Cold War, an AI Cold War, and whoever wins this race for AI dominance over the next several years is going to dominate the world stage for the perceived future. And what's really interesting in here is some of the things that they are doing and some of the ways that they are going to go about doing it in order to ensure that America wins that race. And so I'm not going to read the whole document to you, but I am going to run through the really important parts and let you know what you can expect over the coming years, both the good and the bad. And so let's jump right in here. We got a little quote at the beginning from Donald Trump that I'm quite sure he didn't write. And then we've got a table of contents. They essentially break this up into three different areas. Pillar 1 is accelerate AI innovation. Pillar 2 is build America's AI infrastructure. And Pillar 3, lead in international AI diplomacy and security. And all those things sound pretty good until you start to dig into the meat of it. And so I'm going to read the highlighted sections. Basically, I read the entire document. These are the really important things that sort of establish what America is going to be doing and what particularly this administration is going to be focused on for the balance of their time in office. So it starts out in the introduction. We're going to lay the groundwork here. The United States is in a race to achieve global dominance in artificial intelligence. Whoever has the largest AI ecosystem will set global AI standards and reap broad economic and military benefits. So this is what they're after: broad economic and military benefits. It says the United States needs to innovate faster and more comprehensively than our competitors in the development and distribution of new AI technologies across every field and dismantle unnecessary regulatory barriers that hinder the private sector in doing so. So essentially, they've set the stage of what they want to do. They're saying we have to be the global leader in AI development. And in order to do that, we're going to have to tear down a lot of the regulation that is currently in place in order to do that. Now, let me just give a caveat here. I am generally a fan of deregulation. I think that as a general rule, America has far too much regulation and would do well to go in and carve out a lot of stuff. And instead of just enforcing the laws they have on the books, they go out and build new laws, create new regulation that ends up harming economic activity, harming innovation, far more than it helps protect the people. But there are certain instances where it is critically important, and the government plays a very critical role in ensuring the safety and security of the American people, and really people all around the world, because when we talk about pollution and things like that, it's kind of a global thing. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but just understand, because anytime we start talking about politics and we start talking about regulation and things like that, people tend to want to put you into a bucket. Oh, you're either a deregulation guy or a regulation guy. You either care about the environment or you don't. You either believe in climate change or you don't. I don't want you getting the wrong interpretation of what I'm saying. I am not for this administration. I'm not against this administration. I am for AI innovation, right? I'm not against it, but I think we have some very big concerns that we need to tackle, and I'm going to kind of address those as we go through this document. So then they go on to say, the administration will ensure that our nation's workers and their families gain from the opportunities created in this technological revolution. AI will improve the lives of Americans by complementing their work, not replacing it. Now, this is just a bald-faced lie. Anyone who thinks that AI is going to complement every worker and every job is fooling themselves. They're delusional, because we've already seen AI replace work. We've already seen a reduction in the number of people being hired in certain industries. And whether you call that a job loss or a job that was never created, the net benefit on American workers is exactly the same. There are fewer jobs because AI is allowing people to be far more productive, and it's allowing businesses to cut costs. And there's an interesting dichotomy that's happening right now that's going to begin to take shape, I think, over the next 5 years. And that's the combination of robotics and what we've been able to see with the future of essentially robots, and the combination of that ability, the dexterity of these robots and the AIs that are being built. At some point, those are going to come together. And it's going to spell disaster for a lot of the jobs that people think right now are very safe, like construction worker jobs, or let me think of another, like nursing. This would be another one where you could potentially have AI and robotics doing a big chunk of that work. But we'll get into more of that as we go through this document. Second, our AI systems must be free from ideological bias and be designed to pursue objective truth rather than social engineering agendas who seek factual information or analysis when seeking factual information or analysis. Now, I think that's a very good thing. I think that we ought to have unbiased AI models. The question is, who decides what is biased? And as we continue to read, that statement is going to become really important. All right, so that's our introduction. Now we move into Pillar 1, Accelerating AI Innovation. It says, to maintain global leadership in AI, America's private sector must be unencumbered by bureaucratic red tape. President Trump has already taken multiple steps towards this goal, including rescinding Biden's Executive Order 14110 on AI that foreshadowed the onerous regulatory regime. Now, I went ahead and looked up Executive Order 14110, and essentially what it is it's putting some guardrails on what AI can do and what sort of security measures are in place in order to prevent abuse, in order to prevent the AI from the genie from getting out of the bottle, and in order to protect the American people from a super intelligence, because that's what we're working towards. AI is already smarter than most of the humans. They don't have a lot of the cognitive ability. They can't think through complex problems yet, but you give them very specific problems, coding problems, scientific problems. They're far smarter than any human alive today, or at least smarter than the vast majority of humans today. And the real fear is that at some point, they're going to become self-aware, or they're going to end up infecting other systems, and they're going to take over those systems. And so part of what that executive order that Biden put in place was, hey, you're going to have protections in place to ensure that doesn't happen. And of course, this is something that Trump rescinded, because if you truly believe that the dominant country in the decades to follow are going to be the ones who have AI superiority, then by any means necessary, right? Because the very future of our nation is at risk. And again, there's a lot of people who would say, well, this isn't really the responsibility for government. If that happens, other companies can sue, or individuals can sue in order to receive compensation for whatever damage AI does. And I want to present you with a scenario, because I think this is the difference between having a law on the books and having regulation on the books. So take, for example, a large company in northern Wyoming. And this large company is in the manufacturing business, and they create a lot of pollutants. They work with harsh chemicals, dangerous chemicals, and instead of disposing of them carefully, they just pump them into the river. And let's say that, there's no laws on the books preventing it, or even that there is a law saying, hey, you can't dump sewage into the river. And that sewage runs down the river, those poisons, and in southern Wyoming, you have a cattle rancher. That cattle rancher's cattle drink from that river. And in a matter of a few weeks, because all of those chemicals have polluted the water, all of his cattle die, right? Now, you could say, well, go and sue the multinational corporation. Go sue the big company. The cattle rancher can get compensation, and then the company will have to go back and make some amends and have to change its processes, or it's going to get sued over and over again, right? But in this situation, this multinational corporation makes billions and billions and billions of dollars a year. And they can spend decades in litigation against the rancher and preventing him from seeking compensation or getting compensation for his losses. And even if it didn't take that long, even if our legal system wasn't such a mess that a rancher could get in there and he could get his money from them, if they're making billions and billions of dollars a year, they're just going to pollute. Right? They kill the cattle. They don't care. They'll just continue to pay the rancher. Maybe they just buy the rancher out so they can continue to pollute. That's why having regulation, or where regulation becomes important, is that in an instance where the government can now say, hey, it's not just against the law, but we're going to have regulations in place where we're going to come check. And if we find that you're doing this stuff and you're polluting the waters, then we're not just going to seek compensation. We're going to shut your company down. And we're going to prevent you from doing business until these things are taken care of. And that's one role, I think, where government can play a big part in protecting people overall. That same analogy sort of works for AI as well. Is that if there's an arms race for AI advancement and you have a bunch of people who are not incentivized to slow down, put in the proper safety measures, double and triple check what's happening to ensure that the genie's not popping out of the bottle, as I said, then there should be regulation in place to do that. But what the government is saying here, what the White House is saying is we're just going to remove all of that regulation and just hope for the best because we need to win. And winning is the most important thing, because if we don't win, then we won't be the leaders, the last great economic superpower anymore, and that's an unacceptable outcome. So how are we going to do this? It says, well, we're going to work with federal agencies to have AI-related discretionary funding programs to ensure, consistent with applicable laws, that they consider a state's AI regulatory climate when making funding decisions and limit funding if the state's AI regulatory regime may hinder the effectiveness of the funding or award. So to translate that, what they're saying is, we want you to take the guardrails off. We want you to let things go and stop regulating, stop being overly concerned about AI. And if you don't, we are not going to give you funding for AI projects in your state. So again, this is the administration kind of holding the states hostage and saying, you'll either agree with us or you're not going to get funded and your state is going to fall behind. And you're going to see this sort of repeat itself throughout this entire document. The government, the administration is taking a very strong position that says you are either with us or you are against us, not just with our allies, but with people in the local state governments saying this is the way it's going to be. You either accept it or we're going to cut you off. That's pretty dangerous stuff. Okay? Ensure that Frontier AI products protects free speech and American values. So this is what's funny. So remember at the beginning of it, they said, hey, we need to have free speech with AI. We can't be encumbered by these biases and letting people just pump into these AIs whatever they want to fill their sort of social agendas. They say it's essential that these systems be built from the ground up with the freedom of speech and expression in mind, and that the U.S. government policy does not interfere with that objective. I agree with that 100%. So how are we going to do that? Well, led by the Department of Commerce through the National Institute of Standards and Technology, revisit the AI risk management framework to eliminate references to misinformation, diversity, equity, and inclusion, or climate change. Now, explain to me how that is free speech. They're saying, hey, we want free speech, but not if it includes discussions about misinformation, DEI, or climate change. And this is the funny thing about free speech, and there's a reason why we should all be in favor of this, is it allows bad ideas to come to light, and allows good ideas that are maybe socially unacceptable or out of the mainstream to be given a spotlight so that other people can look and decide for themselves what is truth and what isn't, right? Objective truth. So when you think about objective truth, is climate change objective truth? Well, certainly the climate is changing, right? So I don't think anyone would deny that the climate is the same today as it was 10,000 years ago. And the climate is changing. Now, is the climate changing more rapidly than it was before? Well, that's not necessarily objective truth, but it might actually be true. It depends on the measuring stick that you use. It depends on a lot of different factors, right? But to suggest that you can't talk about climate change, that you can't bring ideas forward that either support or reject that notion, is not free speech. That's controlled speech. That's following an agenda. And that's exactly what the administration said it didn't want to do, but it says right here in plain English that that's what they intend to do. And again, update federal procurement guidelines to ensure that the governments only contract with frontier large language model developers who ensure that their systems are objective and free from top-down ideological bias. Well, so what's the government saying? Here's the standard. We want free speech as long as you don't talk about anything that we don't like. And then, by the way, if you don't develop your AI models in a way that conform to our version of what is objective truth, then we're not going to fund you. and you're going to have to go find funding. You're going to have trouble getting regulations passed. You're going to have trouble getting through the red tape because we're not going to help you out unless you do things the way we want them done. The reason that this is so important is that this is going to define, at least for the next few years, how these companies operate and what they do and what sort of capitulations they make in order to ensure that the U.S. government is on their side and that they can continue to dominate. Because we've got two different factors at play here. We not only have the U.S. wanting to dominate the world in AI technology, but we also have individual companies wanting to dominate all the other companies. And this becomes a serious problem when those two people need to come together and the government is telling them what they need to do, and they're going to have to act in a way that, makes the government happy. And when the government is doing things in one breath of saying, let's have free speech, and in another breath saying, well, only speech that we like, though, then we have a problem, right? So enabling AI adoption is kind of the next section that I looked at in sort of like removing the bottlenecks and how we're going to ensure that AI is adopted quickly by a lot of people. Because that is one of the big bottlenecks that happen right now, is it's very slow to be adopted. If you're an owner of a company, AI technology is changing so fast, it's really hard to keep up. More people are starting to adopt it, but not at the rate that we probably should have. And then the other problem is that the people who are adopting it are keeping it close to the vest. Because there is a real concern that if the boss finds out that what used to take me 15 hours a week now only takes me 3 minutes, that might put my job in jeopardy. Or that the boss may come back and just pile more work onto me than I was already doing. And so those employees inside those companies that are innovating tend to be holding it close to the vest and not sharing it with other people, especially those inside their own company. So it says, how are we going to solve this? Establish regulatory sandbox or AI center for excellence around the country where researchers, startups, and established enterprises can rapidly deploy and test AI tools while committing to open sharing of data and results. Well, again, I don't know how you can commit to the open sharing of data and results when, in fact, one of the real problems is you're trying to create alpha inside of your company. If you're creating, unless these data centers are just completely designed to work for the public good, which almost never happens, let's face it, almost never happens, then we've got a real concern here that we might just spend a lot of money so a very small number of individuals or companies can have a lot of data that gives them a competitive advantage. Right? So that's a concern inside of here as well, is how are they going to do this in a way where there is actually open sharing? So now we move into empowering the American worker. And remember, AI is not going to replace anybody's job. It's just going to complement their job, just going to make it easier for them. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to have a worker-first AI agenda, as they say? Well, first, we're going to prioritize AI skill development as a core objective of relevant education and workforce funding streams. Good grief, it's just such garbage language. This should include promoting the integration of AI skills development into relevant programs, including career and technology education, workforce training, apprenticeships, and other federally supported skills initiatives. Now, this I'm also a fan of. I think the more that we can do inside of our school system and inside of our workforce, inside of our own companies, to train people up on how to use artificial intelligence, the better off we're all going to be. One of the big concerns I have with my children, I've got 4 children, 3 of them are now in high school and one of them's in middle school. They restrict the use of AI almost entirely in their entire curriculum, which is scary to me. Because the only people in a workforce of tomorrow that are going to be able to survive and dominate are going to be those who know how to use AI, who don't just know surface level, like how to use ChatGPT, like they know how to build stuff. They know how to cooperate with stuff that's been built in order to improve the quality of the output, the speed of the output, all of that, right? So if young children today are behind me at 46 years old on how to use AI and technology, we have a problem, because they should be the ones who should be at the forefront of this technological revolution. And unfortunately, they're not, in large part because the education system in our country is still trying to protect the old, tired way of training our children. But we do have a bigger problem than this. And let me just make sure that there's nothing else in here. Oh, let me read the rest of this. So this comes into, this is all the same thing. So leverage available discretionary funding where appropriate to fund rapid retraining for individuals impacted by AI-related job displacement. So wait, I thought we weren't going to have any job displacement. I thought that it was just going to complement our workers. No, it turns out a ton of people, a massive number of Americans are going to find themselves out of a job. That's what they mean by job displacement. It means getting fired, right? As well as guidance clarifying how states' rapid response funds can be used to proactively upskill workers at risk of future displacement. So again, recognizing that we're going to have a very serious problem. And then rapidly pilot new approaches to workforce challenges created by AI, which may include areas such as rapid training needs driven by worker displacement and shifting skill requirements for entry-level roles. I don't think that anyone has a really clear understanding of how much AI is going to impact the future of not just America, but capitalism in general. So, since its invention, there is no question that capitalism has created more opportunity, more wealth, more technological revolution. It doesn't matter how you measure it, better in virtually every way. In fact, I don't know of a way that people are worse off after capitalism than before it, right? But this is what I've always said. I don't know if capitalism is the best model in the world or the best model that we could use. It's just the best model that we've ever come up with. But we are facing down a reality that nobody wants to talk about, and that is in the future, when AI takes over the vast majority of jobs, there are going to be a ton of people who can't be retrained, who can't find another gig because they don't have the intelligence that's required to operate at those new high-tech, high-paced sort of jobs. Let me give you an example of what I mean. This is a bell curve of American IQ. And most of the people in America, about 50% of them have an IQ of 100 or below, and the rest of them have an IQ of 100 or above. And right now, if you have an IQ below 83, you basically aren't able to, you can't really find a job where you're going to provide any productive benefit. And the reason that we know this is if we look at the U.S. military, which has no need to produce a profit for anything, will not take anyone who has an IQ below 83. The U.S. military essentially says, hey, if you're below 83, there's no job that you can do in the military that will be worth having you. And so anyone with an IQ that low outside in the private sector, really, if they're doing work, it's somewhat of charity work, or it's something that they're just being given a job to do, but the economic benefit just really doesn't match what they're being paid, especially now with base pays rising to $10, $15, $20 an hour in many cases for a lot of these jobs, okay? Now, why is that important? Well, let's look at the jobs between 95, an IQ of 95, and basically 105. Okay, so these are people who are considered pretty smart. They're above average intelligence or roughly above average intelligence. What jobs are they eligible to do? Okay, so right now, and again, before I go any further, 83 is kind of like right down here. So if we consider this line kind of right in here as the cutoff point for where people can do productive work in American society today, it's kind of right here. Right? The bottom 25% or so. Now let's look at those jobs with IQs of 95 to 105. Administrative assistant, all right? Customer service rep, retail sales associate, delivery driver, construction worker, warehouse worker, food service worker, healthcare support roles, home health aide, security guards, maintenance workers, or janitors, right? Now, how many of those jobs are at risk today of AI taking over? Well, this one, 100%. Customer service representatives, we're already seeing it. Just technology, not even AI, just the ability for machines now to be able to take orders at restaurants and speed up that process. We're already seeing, and especially in the fast food area, this take over. Retail sales associate, not so much yet. Delivery drivers, definitely. Autonomous driving cars are already here. I live in Scottsdale. We have Waymo. I take Waymos everywhere I go. I don't even use Uber or Lyft anymore. I like Waymo. They're safer than any other drivers on the road. And that's coming. In fact, Uber, Lyft are all making massive investments into technologies like Waymo. Same thing with X. Making massive investments in that because they know that's the future, and they know that they're going to be able to achieve greater profitability when they don't have to pay drivers. Construction workers and warehouse workers are already being replaced. Just look at any Amazon warehouse. They're taking technology right now and using it to replace workers. Construction workers are still somewhat safe. My point is this. These are the folks at 95 to 105 IQ. What happens when, what happens when the day comes and artificial intelligence is smart enough to do every job for people who have an IQ below 105, or even 90% of them? What happens when 60%, 70% of your workforce is now unemployable? That destroys the capitalist economic model, where it's like, hey, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, find a skill where you can provide value to others, and then go out and sell it, right? There's a time in the very near future where this is going to become a big problem, and this economic model is going to break down. And again, I'm not an anti-capitalist. I think capitalism is wonderful. But I think we can't just say, oh, we're going to have to retrain workers, because the vast majority of these workers aren't going to be able to be retrained. They just simply don't have the intelligence to be able to operate in a world where artificial intelligence does the vast majority of work for people with IQs under 100, could even be 120. So this is a concern. We need to start rethinking the way we do things, and this document doesn't even address the real issues. It's basically less like taking a paintbrush and say, hey, don't worry if you're going to be displaced by AI, we're going to retrain you and you're going to be able to get a new job, an even better job, a higher paying job, because you'll know how to use AI now. And that's just simply not the case, and it's scary. All right. Support next-gen manufacturing. AI will enable a wide range of new innovations in the physical world. Autonomous drones, self-driving cars, robotics, and other inventions for which tech terminology does not yet exist. It is critical that America and our trusted allies be world-class manufacturers in the next-gen technologies. And so in the next breath, right after it says, don't worry, we're going to retrain you, they're saying, yeah, but here's all the jobs here's all the things that we need to be in, that we need to be leaders in, and all of them replace you. Again, it's just the doublespeak. I don't know if the administration understands how hypocritical it's being in this document, but it's been a painful read because they clearly do not understand. They might understand the global threat, but they definitely have no grip on what they really need to be doing in order to ensure that Americans are okay, that Americans are able to thrive in the new economy, and not just that the government continues to be the dominant, political force, a dominant country on the world stage. Now, the rest of this stuff is really just stuff about science and how they're going to fund different science projects. So I'm not going to read all that to you. We're just going to get down to section 2 here. Pillar 2, building AI infrastructure. So here's how we're going to do it. AI will require new infrastructure, factories, and to produce chips, data centers, to run those chips, and new sources of energy to power it all. America's environmental permitting system and other regulations make it almost impossible to build this infrastructure in the United States with the speed that is required. I agree with that. Escalating demand driven by electrification and the technological advancements of AI are increasing pressures on the grid. The United States must develop a comprehensive strategy to enhance and expand the power grid. Here's the problem. You can reduce the regulation. You can go after new energy sources. I think it says in here, if we scroll down just a little bit farther, looking at enhanced geothermal, nuclear fission, and nuclear fusion. Nuclear, not nuclear. Anyway, here's the problem. Even if you removed a lot of the regulations and security measures in place to build, say, a nuclear facility. It's going to take you 5 years, and that's if you're running. It's probably going to take you closer to 10 years by the time you get it all done to make sure it's done safe and correct. What are we going to do in the meantime? Because right now it's estimated that we're going to need double the grid power that we currently have. Not only do we not have the power generation sources that we need, we also don't have the infrastructure in order to transport that power where it needs to go. If you take a look at our grid is 40 to 50 years old. That's how long it's been since we've invested in that infrastructure. And you're going to need years and years of not just building new power sources of power, but building out the infrastructure in order to make it work, even if you cut back on the regulations. And so there's a big concern about where the power is going to come from in the meantime, because it's estimated that, as I said, we're going to need to double the amount of power that we're getting from our grid in the next 10 years. And we're nowhere close to it. We're probably 5 to 10 years away from even starting to roll that stuff out and get it to where it needs to go. And so no real plan here. Just like, oh, we're going to invest in new power plants and we're going to look at nuclear and we're going to look at, wind and solar and all that stuff. That's basically a money pit. Those things in reality don't actually, the cost of doing them, the cost of building them, the cost of the technology doesn't pay for itself. If you put solar panels on your roof, you're basically going to get free energy for a little while, and then you're going to have to replace the solar panels. They're getting better. They're getting more efficient. Wind is a complete joke, right? So these are all areas where we can't use alternative clean energy. We're going to have to go after coal. We're going to have to go after gas. We're going to have to do those things. And the fact is, you can't get a refinery built in this country. And you definitely can't get a nuclear power plant built. Now, there is some stuff, even though I don't care for him much. You've got Bill Gates, in cooperation with the Chinese, have developed what they are calling a meltdown-proof reactor. And I've done a little bit of research on it, but it's certainly something that might be a viable option moving forward. But at this point, we're still 10 years out. They're still testing that thing. It's got a long way to go before you would want to build a reactor in somebody's backyard. So what are we going to do in the meantime? They have no plan for that. None at all. All right. Now we're going to scroll down to, I think, the last section here, which is leading international AI diplomacy and security. And again, when I talked earlier about a new Cold War, this is a section that kind of lays that out in no uncertain terms. It says the United States must meet global demand for AI by exporting its full AI technology stack, hardware, models, software applications, and standards to all countries willing to join America's alliance. Well, we know we're not going to do that, right? We just said we have to be the leader, we have to dominate, we have to own the tech. So how are we then going to give the tech to all of our allies? I think what they mean is we're going to build it and we're going to sell it to you and you're going to buy it from us, not our adversaries. The distribution and diffusion of American technology will stop our strategic rivals from making our allies dependent on foreign adversary technology. So essentially they are saying here, we got to build faster so that we control all the stuff, all the technology, all the hardware and software, and then we can be the ones that sell it to our allies so our allies don't have to go and buy it from our adversaries. Again, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but just the way they're going to plan on going about doing it is a little sketch. So if we come down here, countering Chinese influence, the United States supports like-minded nations working together to encourage the development of AI in line with our shared values. But too many of these efforts have advocated for burdensome regulation, vague code of conduct that promotes cultural agendas that do not align with American values. Now think of the hypocrisy of that very statement. They're saying, hey, we want to support people who share our values. But too many people have other ideas and have other values that don't align with ours. Ours mainly being that you have to deregulate, that you can't talk about climate change, and you can't put any sort of like burdensome regulation on anybody so that they don't build as fast as we do. this is a problem. I mean, what is American values if not a vague code of conduct that promotes a cultural agenda? That's what an American value is. It's the cultural agenda. So this statement in and of itself is basically saying, hey, you're either with us or you're against us. Either you have the same values we have as we define them today, or you don't. So what happens if you don't? Well, we get into it. So how are we going to do this? Collaborate with IC officials on global chip export control enforcement. This will include monitoring emerging technology developments in AI compute to ensure full coverage of possible countries or regions where chips are being divested. So essentially, if you don't agree with us, you can't buy any of our technology. Oh, and by the way, if you decide to sell it to if you have technology and you decide to sell it to a country that we don't like, we're going to punish you for that. How are we going to do that? We must continue to lead the world with path-breaking research and new inventions in semiconductor manufacturing, but the United States must also prevent our adversaries from using our innovations to their own ends in ways that undermine our national security. Good luck with that. America must impose strong export controls on sensitive technologies. We should encourage partners and allies to follow U.S. controls and not backfill. If they do, America should use tools such as the Foreign Direct Product Rule and secondary tariffs to achieve greater international alignment. So to translate this into raw English, what are they saying? We're going to set the rules. And we're going to tell you who you can sell technology to and who you can't. And if you don't do what we say, we're going to come after you with big tariffs or other sort of rules and regulations that we impose on your country to hamstring you. Oh, and by the way, if you happen to be a country that we don't like at any particular time, then what we're going to do is we're just going to lock you out of the world market. We're not going to let you buy semiconductors from any of the major countries. We're not going to allow you to contribute or to support the global AI revolution. What we're going to do is we're going to do our best to keep you in the Stone Ages. This is why I say we are that we are in the midst of a brand new Cold War. One that will determine how things shape out over the next several decades. And the biggest concern I have is not that there's going to be a war with China and the US or with Russia and China or anything like that. That's certainly a possibility. My biggest fear is that we are going to deregulate and reduce the need and the time it takes, and we're not going to slow down enough to put the guardrails in place that ensure that this technology doesn't get out of hand. I think there's a real threat. I think AI is going to do more for us than any other technology ever created by man. I don't think that that is an overstatement. But I think if we are not careful, if we don't move slowly and deliberately to ensure that this thing doesn't overtake us, and that we have time to retrain the workers that we can retrain and to come up with an economic model that will work for the ones that we can't retrain. If we don't do that, we are going to do irreparable damage to the United States and potentially to the rest of the world. And if you combine this with an aggressive foreign policy that says we're right, and if you don't think we're right, then screw you, we're going to try and hurt you, we have a recipe for disaster. And so I don't even know what to do about this. I'd call your congressman. That's a waste of time. Elect a new president. It's going to be largely the same thing, because regardless of who's in the White House and who's in Congress, everyone is in alignment with the notion that, hey, if we don't move faster than the next guy, that our country is over, that we're going to lose our power and lose our control. And for people who are in politics, that's what it's about. It's about power and control. And so I want to make you aware of this administration, the way they're thinking about doing things and going about things, the risks that are involved with that, so that as you are making decisions in your own life and raising your own kids and training your own workforce, that you understand the real economic, cultural, and military impact that these technologies are going to have. And it's not going to be 10 or 20 years in the future. It's going to be next year and the year after. The rate of worker displacement is going to continue to escalate. So if you work for another company, You better learn how to do this stuff. You better learn not just how to use ChatGPT, but you better learn how to use it in cooperation with other technologies that enhance your ability to do your work. If you own a company, you better start implementing now. Otherwise, you are going to be completely out of the loop and you're going to be unable to compete in the economy of next year, not the economy of tomorrow, literally the economy of next year. So again, I don't mean to scare you. I hope this made a lot of sense. I hope you got a lot out of it. Please remember to like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. Share this with people. Share it with people who need to hear it. You've got a handful of people in your community right now, in your phone, in your contact list that need to watch this video. Send it to them. And I'll talk to you soon.